everyone. This is Philip Connect with Hill Country History. Welcome back to our channel. This will be our first video, our full-length video that we're doing. And it's hard to decide where to start with. What movie, what short film to start with. It was, should we do some history, early history, prehistoric history? Should we do antebellum history? Should we talk about the people, the culture, the music, all that? And finally I decided, because of what time of the year it is, it's fall. This is my favorite season of the year. Certainly here in Holly Springs, it's my favorite. And of course, we are used to going into, say, to Vermont or New England or the Smoky Mountains, places that are known for their fall foliage. Beautiful, amazing, bright, vibrant fall foliage. And I love going there as well, but don't want to sleep on North Mississippi, the North Mississippi Hill Country. A lot of wonderful colors we have here. Now, we're not ever going to be like those places I listed, New England and East Tennessee and North Carolina. We just don't have the temperature. We don't have the right set of weather circumstances and all that. But with the right weather and with some sustained temperatures of a certain degree, we can have some really good colors here in Holly Springs. Everyone who's lived here or visited here at this time of year knows that we can have some wonderful bright colors. And we're going to be exploring that in this video. I'm also going to be exploring North Mississippi itself. In fact, I went on about a 200-mile round trip around North Mississippi. It's what I call the Hill Country Circuit, all around North Mississippi. I've done it many times before, but never with the intention of kind of filming for fall foliage. So according to most of the sources that I use and other kind of leaf peepers use, right now, so the end of November should be peak season for fall foliage here in North Mississippi. So we're going to see about that. We're going to, again, drive around, look at what is there, if it's a good year or not, and all that. So stay tuned. Okay, so we've gone around North Mississippi, looked at all that fall foliage. Just saw some really amazing color. Maybe not as great as in previous years, but really nice color, really beautiful color. Even the muted colors here that we get in North Mississippi, sort of the dark yellows, the darker reds, the browns, the greens, and all that. I think are beautiful. I love it. I miss them when they're gone, when we head into winter and all that. So I love all the colors, and I hope you enjoyed them as well. But it's amazing that I found the absolute best colors really in all North Mississippi, right here in Holly Springs, right here in my hometown. And not just here in Holly Springs, but just feet away from my house here in Holly Springs. Some really amazing color. And to sort of find out why things are so different here in Holly Springs, why do we have such great color here compared to maybe some of the other cities and towns and regions here in North Mississippi, I've turned to one of my good friends. His name is Mitch Robinson. He's a local ecologist, local arborist. I've known him for quite a while now. Fairly recently, he has started an initiative called HollyWild. He's one of the founders with a few other individuals. And HollyWild is an interesting, really cool organization, something that I align with quite well. So Mitch was kind enough to give a public kind of a tour of the town at some of these colors and maybe answer some of our questions. So we're gonna go ahead and meet with him now. Okay, so we're here in Holly Springs, Mississippi. I'm here with my friend Mitch Robinson, who is the founder of HollyWild, something you created pretty recently. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and what got you into this field and kind of what made you start this HollyWild initiative?
Yeah. So I guess first off, it's not necessarily me or anything I started. This was through conversations with neighbors, new neighbors. My friend Joanna Lawrence just moved here back at the beginning of 2024, and literally I was out in my wildflower meadow and ran into her, and we had not seen each other in a decade since she first came out to Strawberry Plains, which is when I moved to Holly Springs in 2024. So all of that started conversations around some of the things I've started noticing here around downtown. I've been here a little over 10 years, and my background is as an ecologist, and I'm also a certified arborist. And so I've been spending a lot of time, not just on the streets, but in certain areas of town, looking at some of these really large, historic, native oak trees, maple trees, elms, even our Eastern red cedars. We have some magnificent ones here. And as I started looking through my list of all the birds that I've been seeing here in town, I began to recognize that species that I used to only go out to Strawberry Plains or our other state wildlife protected areas like Chihuahua Lake or Waldoxie, that not only was I coming across them here in town, but was seeing them throughout the breeding season, meaning that they weren't just passing through and stopping in migration, but they were setting up shop here and breeding in our urban canopy. So as I started talking to Joanna, and we were talking about, why she moved here, why she had come from Memphis, was in Oxford for a while, other folks that have moved to Holly Springs for a variety of reasons. I moved here and decided to stick around after my wife and I at the time in 2019 had bought a historic home, and part of the reason we bought it was, because of the trees there. These 200-300-year-old trees in the landscape that we love Annabelle architecture, but it wasn't the reason we bought the house. And now I'm not only seeing trees, but I'm seeing the landscape around town and, when things were built and how this has been, a cumulative thing over time, and that just as much as our historic architecture here is a, strong draw for whether it be tourism or interest in the community's history, our canopy here is unique, and that's just from a human sense, not even getting into the myriad benefits from an ecological and habitat sense.
Right. So I've lived here kind of about the same time. I lived here about 10, 12 years now. I've noticed too how about just the trees here, just amazing. Fall has always been my favorite season. That's the reason I'm doing this video now. Reason I drove 200 miles all around North Mississippi to try to find the best sort of fall foliage. I think the website you and I both kind of look at both has said right now should be about peak, or maybe a week too early, a week too late, but roughly this is about peak. So I really wanted to see just how good the color was, and I went all over the place. I did get some good photos, but this morning I woke up and walked right where we're standing here, and we'll of course see this when we go on the tour a little bit later, but just how amazing the color is here. What is it about Holly Springs that's just unique, or what is it about the trees or the environment? What makes these colors so amazing? I mean, these are colors you would see almost in
Vermont or like to Smoky Mountains, places like that.
Absolutely.
It's really amazing.
So it's a lot of factors. I guess the first one would be the types of trees. So it's the species. So our native deciduous trees here, things like elms, maples, our oaks as well, our red oaks, even our white oaks can get some nice color. It has to do with, those factors, initially, but then also where we are relative to other landscapes. So we are here on top of the Pontotoc Ridge. I mean, from a, very ancient perspective, this was a transition zone for the Chickasaw Nation, going between their hunting grounds and the lower, flatter, more open areas toward the Mississippi Delta, and then heading back toward, their main grounds, and I guess would have been, their central gathering area near Pontotoc. So, in the 1820s, when people began to moving into this area, the founding of the town around the mid-1830s, the founding of our town being named literally after a native tree that was found because it was around a native spring that was, they said 30 feet across, 10 feet deep. A horse could have gotten up to his shoulder, and that spring is still here. It's what our town was built around. There are trees located there that were, alive and well at the founding of our nation, that were a 150-year-old tree at the year Ida B. Wells was born in Spring Hollow. So all of those things play into the historical landscape and where we are positioned here on the Pontotoc Ridge. So one of the things that's unique about Holly Springs is that while we had, historically a native diversity here, the individuals that were involved in the city planning, I learned just last night around General Williamson, I guess is his name.
Who lived around the house right behind us.
Right behind us here, yeah, in Linden. That he was instrumental in planting native trees throughout our cityscapes. Had that happened in probably the 1920s, they probably would have been all non-native trees, just because of the way the nursery industry works. Right. So it's interesting too is that, we have trees of many different age classes. We have different types of species of, different types of maples, different types of oaks. And so the chemical makeup within the leaves themselves, also too, when the leaves begin shutting down, so the chlorophyll stops, they start losing their green color. The yellows and the orange start appearing. We have other things that happen. We have things that are called anthocyanins in the leaves that are the red hues that don't start to appear until we get what we were talking about. You get not necessarily a hard cold or a big transition, but it's that slow transition of days are getting a little bit shorter, the nights are getting a little bit cooler, the days are still warm, so the trees are still photosynthesizing, so you kind of get that little bit of a somewhat tenuous period of where things are stretched out. And so this year, I think it's a compound of the drought that we've had the last 2 years, also too that we've had a very, very warm summer, we've had a late fall. So all of those things kind of added up to, we could have the exact same conditions, next year in 10 years, and hey guys, we probably won't have the exact same color. So it's a variety of things. So not a real straight answer to your question, but it really does come down to, historically what were the native trees here. That's, what was around. It's what they decided to, choose to plant on the landscapes here. And so it's representative of how, city planning and thinking about these large thoroughfares that were, laid out at the very beginning of the first 2 decades of this town, that today, where we're standing, where we decided to walk today on our hike, where folks are going to decide to walk this week, the couple that we're looking at right now walking underneath this ginkgo, like, it probably wasn't a rational decision, but planting that tree specifically where it's located is having manifold benefits, 150 years later for every individual in this community. And that's only the human ones. We're not even talking about all of the insects that are feeding on the leaves of our oaks and maples, and that the ripple effect that has with our bird populations. Right before we started filming, I heard there's a real soft song that's probably the opposite of a bird song, but it's a little seep, seep, seep. That's a cedar waxwing. So that's a bird that does not spend its summer here. It breeds up north and it comes here in the winter. So they are showing up right now because of what our town is named after. Holly Springs is, they're coming here to feed on the red berries of our Native American holly, of our Yopon holly, of the fruits of some of our other trees. And so, yeah, it's always real telling to see, these different wildlife coming through and how they're benefiting from the trees themselves throughout the different years.
Yeah, Mitch, thank you so much.
Yeah, man, thank you.
And let's go look at some trees.
All right, man. favorite things to talk about this time of year is like the notion of what they call like senescence. So in nature, you know, particularly with species that, like with flowers, we call them perennials. So they die above ground, maybe their basal leaves will remain, but everything else is within the roots. So our deciduous trees have evolved from a really, really, you know, ancient lineage up in the top of the Arctic. And I'll talk a little bit about this, or how, you know, the Earth does not sit like this. It sits at about 20 degrees, and then it spins. And so as that happens, that's why the top of the globe gets different amount of sunlight than the bottom, and that affects seasonality, and it also affected how plants moved across the Earth over hundreds of millions of years. But so all that to say, trees, when you look at them, right? So what we see as living really is, it's kind of like the changing of the color, all those things that seem alive. That truly is like the most living part of the tree for parts of the year. But for the rest of the time, all right, we're not going to do this. I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you, though. So for the rest of the year, if you were looking, like, let's say that a tree was actually a square, right? So that outer 10%, you know, this is an average, is basically the only portion of that tree that's alive, right? So when you think vertically, right, transverse going up and down the tree, the good analogy is kind of like our bones. At one point, every part of our bones were alive, right? They were actually living tissue, but over time, they're basically a structural mechanism that still can conduct other minerals, nutrients, fluids, fats, all sorts of things, but the actual connective tissue itself is not alive. So similarly in trees, that outer portion there is really the only portion that's alive. So with deciduous trees, when we think about like annual growth rings, the thing that's really unique about deciduous trees is that they are putting all of their growth on during certain months of the year, unlike a conifer where it's going to be higher during the part of the year where the sun is higher up in the sky and they're getting more sunlight throughout the day. Maybe trees over here are going to get sun that they wouldn't over there when the sun's lower. But those growth rings, as they grow, the tree itself is actually adding, you know, it expands out this way, but what's happening is on the inner layer here, inside the tree, there's a layer that's called the cambium, and that's the main reproductive tissue in the sense of creating new cells. So it's constantly throughout the growing season adding cells and sticking them inside, just pushing them in. And so as they kind of push in, the tree slowly grows out. And so what ends up happening is that ends up being the conductive tissue that basically is taking from, obviously the sun is coming in, that's coming in with carbon dioxide, and then they end up having a chemical reaction that breaks that down into a glucose type of sugar, and that gives off oxygen through respiration. It also gives off some water, and all of that moves down through these tubes and basically goes and is stored in the roots. So what ends up happening as three things start to change. Obviously our temperature, not this year, but our temperature typically gets a little bit colder. The bigger thing though is, in our minds, it's daylight savings, but the sun is actually getting lower and lower in the sky as we, in terms of the Earth orbiting. So again, we are on an axis like this. So the North Pole is here, but the North Pole sits about 20 degrees this way. So as it's rotating, at different times of the year, that's getting further and further away from the sun. So when we are at our furthest place away from the sun is getting lower and lower in the sky from our perspective in the Northern Hemisphere. So what the trees start doing is they recognize it's going to take more energy to try to produce energy than it is to be able to just shut down for the year. So this is a development that happened from an evolutionary standpoint that changed the whole landscape of the entire living world, because now trees were able to continue to put on growth year after year after year and not die back to the ground and survive in areas where you may not have sunlight for 7 months of the year, up in like the Arctic. But now they've taken that trait and they've moved further and further down, so that as we get out of Mississippi, get down toward the coast, get closer and closer to the tropics, you know, that shortness of the season gets less and less and less to where they don't really drop their leaves. So how does that affect birds? Well, in the tropics, where there's a tremendous amount of insects, a tremendous amount of vegetation, a tremendous amount of food for birds, many millions of years ago, some of these birds made a further trip north and began recognizing that because of that same thing, the seasonality and of the leaves literally falling off the trees, that there's a period where there's a lot more insects further north where there's not other birds around. So some of our migrants started making these trips across the Gulf of Mexico, coming all the way up the west coast, all the way up the east coast, solely to come and feed on the insects that are taking advantage of the sun being higher in the sky for 5 or 6 months. So that's like big science stuff, right? How does this all get back to the trees themselves? Well, there's chemicals within the trees that are present year-round. So the number one we all know is chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is what ends up breaking down when it's photosynthesizing, it's breaking down that carbon dioxide, producing sugars, and also releasing water, and then producing oxygen, and then taking those sugars and storing them down in the roots. But what's also happening is deciduous trees, as they are also photosynthesizing all summer long, they are also producing next year's leaves, flowers, and what are going to become seeds and fruits. So as that starts to happen and they're starting to put those nutrients into those buds, it gets to a point where they have enough nutrients there, the days are getting shorter and shorter, and so the tree recognizes, you know what, everything's getting colder, the days are getting shorter, we're not going to be able to produce as many nutrients, and so they end up just shutting down. So as that happens and photosynthesis starts to wane, the other colors become to start appearing. So in ginkgos, which are unlike any of our other trees in the world, they shouldn't be around anymore. They're, I think, over 400 million years old in terms of a lineage. There's one of our oldest actual vascular fossilized tree. So they are from the Southeast Asia area. One of the things folks sometimes make the mistake of is that ginkgos are what's called a dioecious tree, or excuse me, a monoecious tree. So mono meaning one, di being two. So monoecious trees are either all male or all female. So if any of you have ever driven along 78 going up to Memphis in the spring, 50 years ago it would have been all pink in March. It was mostly red buds blooming. Now we have a species that was introduced and they bred it in a lab so that it couldn't reproduce in the wild. It was all going to be females, and then what happened, started crossbreeding with our native pears. So now we have Bradford pear, and you can. A lot of people don't like maples, particularly outside of like city limits, because this is also a monoecious tree, so that it's either males or females. The female trees, after they have made their embryos, they make their seed that are called samaras that look kind of like a boomerang. So those can get pretty heavy in terms of like them getting blown about and things like that. But because it's a wind-blown tree, another one that you'll see a lot probably come up in your yard that looks like a maple, it's a type of acer, is a box elder. It's a real fast-growing tree. I mean, I've got ones that probably have been coming up from the roots every year and getting mowed, that they'll put up 4 or 5 feet of growth, in a single growth season and stuff like that. But from the perspective of like good shade trees, they can handle full sun, they're an early successional tree, they can be long-lived. It's probably one of the top 5 trees in terms of the number of insects they host. So number 1 on the list is oaks, but maples are up there, elms are up there. And then, Tim's, thinking through the lens, as we probably always should, like, what's the value besides of like what it brings to us out of just a sense of belonging and joy, is like, could this something that we could like I hate using the word leverage, but bring in tourism? And it's like, yeah, it's pretty easy to plant maple trees, and like they're pretty easy to maintain, and if one dies, like, you got no shortage of them around. So that sort of stuff, like, it's doable. And they grow pretty fast. Like, that's probably not even a 25-year-old tree, here, this other little red maple. Yeah, the pink is Acusa dogwood, which is a non-native, 77, 80 years, which is crazy to think because it's such a small tree. Mm-hmm. But it's just, it's one of the densest woods we have. I'd be curious to know like what historically dogwood was used for, high tensile strength and stuff.
Say thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Mitch.
Well, that was wonderful. I really enjoyed Mitch's presentation, and I'm glad he spoke with us about these kind of fall foliage here in Holly Springs. And I decided to sort of end the movie in this short film with a few more images, a few more sort of videos of here in Holly Springs, kind of the last little bit of color that this town can offer us here in 2024. By the time you see this film, this short film on YouTube, most of the color is going to be gone. That's just the way it works. But the good thing about fall is it comes every year. And we're looking forward to next year, 2025. Maybe we'll have an even more vibrant, even more colorful fall foliage then. But I hope you've enjoyed kind of our jaunt around North Mississippi, Holly Springs, and hope you stick with us. Please feel free to like us here on YouTube, Hill Country History, and subscribe to our channel. We have a lot more planned, a lot more, not just landscape history, but history itself, social history, and talk about the people here in Hill Country and all that. So really hope you join us and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.